So business units tend to take the framework themselves, right? When I've got a large corporation, I have the framework at the top, and then individual business unit will take different slices and interpretations of those frameworks. Welcome to Digital Transformation Architect, architecting the future of digital transformation. I'm Dr. Darren, and this podcast is for leaders navigating the real-world complexity of modern change. Each week, we cut through the hype to explore how strategy, architecture, technology, and people come together across artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, data, edge, and modern infrastructure. This isn't about chasing tools. It's about designing systems that endure. Let's get started. Hey, in this lecture, we're going to talk about the limits of existing transformation frameworks that are out there and why these frameworks don't seem to be fixing transformation problems. And the problem really has to do with our ability to last longer than the framework or longer than the initial meetings. Most organizations already use some kind of transformation framework, yet they see the same failure patterns that they saw even before the framework was utilized. So today we're going to look at what frameworks promise, how they fragment in practice, and why guidance becomes checklists and rituals, and then what implications do those have for structural alignment, and why we need architecture in the end. So when we first take a look at some of the limitations of frameworks today, we already see that transformation failures are largely fail because of structural and architectural alignment, not just technical, and also not just execution. In fact, you have to have alignment between strategy, execution, and governance. And sometimes we put these big, heavy processes on the top of an organization, and the individual departments do what they need to get their job done. And there's a misalignment from the top down into the execution side. We talked about that in the last lecture. What we're going to talk about today primarily is why do we keep seeing these failures, even though I've put a framework in place. Right? So we're going to focus primarily on the structural limitations that are shared by most of these frameworks that are out there, and why we need an architectural approach that provides that structure. Right. So reasonably, what leaders are expecting with a transformation framework is a shared vision and priorities, a de-risking challenge, right? So they talk about risk management a lot. How can I de-risk the change and give me better transparency and predictability in my change? That's what the leaders want. The common ingredients that we see with this are strategic roadmaps, capability maps, maturity models, portfolios, backlogs. Maybe you're running Agile and Scrum. There's prioritization rules that you come up with. There's lots of really great tools in this area. Governance boards are formed, steering committees are formed, and we start setting up these weekly or monthly ceremonies, for no better word, meetings or conclaves where we talk about things that happen. And the idea is that if everyone is on the same framework, we can finally pull everyone in the same direction. So that's the goal. That's where we want to get to. What we typically see is that the framework follows the org chart. So business units tend to take the framework themselves, right? When I've got a large corporation, I have the framework at the top, and then individual business unit will take different slices and interpretations of those frameworks, and they'll work through that. Even though some of the central functions like finance, risk, and compliance, they will keep what they've always done because they're highly regulated and they're already operating what they deem operationally sound, right? Primarily because they're high compliance, high regulatory, they already follow a very strict process, right? The results, though, that we get with this is we get a bunch of parallel and disconnected mini frameworks or adaptations to the framework. Everyone claims to be on the framework, but decisions are still very siloed, and Lack of communication between the business units is a big problem, primarily because of lack of taxonomy between the different organizations. People see things a different way, right? So let's take a look at an example, right, where I've got one framework and many different realities. So at the corporate center, right, the executives come up and mandate, here's my single transformation framework. Everyone's going to use this framework. I've got my product division. Let's say it's a commercial product division, and I've got a enterprise product division, right? The commercial product division goes out there and um, it extends the framework for its own channels and products. And then the enterprise division comes out and says, hey, we don't have as many customers, right? Because we're not going after the commercial market. We're limited to about 20 customers, let's say. So the framework doesn't really fit for us. Let's simplify it and decrease the overhead of the framework and work through my current project cycles and approvals that I already have, right? So now I've got two frameworks that are running, and then I got risk and compliance, right? Where someone in risk and compliance is saying, this is the framework. And then they go in and they look at the different divisions. Are you guys fitting the framework? They have their meetings where one member from each division shows up and they say, yeah, we're fitting in the cycle, the legacy cycle that's already there. And they just kind of form the framework into their legacy cycle that they already have. So what do we end up with? You guess it, we end up with 4 different mini frameworks. And guess what? There's no single coherent way to make decisions that are end to end across the corporation as a whole. So I've seen this time and time again when a framework comes in, a lot of slideware stuff and things like that. Right. So what we have to get back to is the strategy, execution, and governance gap. So typically what happens is they kick off this framework by bringing everyone into the room. They have vision workshops and roadmaps and portfolio setups, and they're well supported at the beginning. And then they have ongoing alignment as reality changes, right? But we're going to check in every quarter, every month, make sure everyone's still aligned. And then steering committees get formed and stage gates get created. And then people start missing their stage gates and the meetings start to fall away. And then all of a sudden, they'll bring it back up and the monthly meeting's now a quarterly meeting. But between these meetings, what happens is the individual business units still have to get work done, and they still do. And now we start getting drift between the framework and the coherency that I wanted and the individual teams needing to get work done. So they gradually shift apart. So, and what happens is everything moves to checklists. And at the end of a couple years, everyone's filling out their checklists, and we still don't have a great digital transformation. And the executives are like going, it says we got it done, but I don't feel anything different. We see this time and time again. So we need to move from guidance to checklists. That happens. We need to not do just checklists. We need to keep the guidance in there, right? Remember, guidance are principles, templates, ceremony, playbooks, types of things. And the mechanisms to do these things are making decisions at the right level, constraints, escalation paths, finding rules. Most frameworks have a really strong, rich guidance, but they're thin on the mechanics. And the reason they're thin on the mechanics is because the mechanics are individual to each business. So they don't go deep enough, right? And what happens is over time, the templates become forms that just get filled in. And if your team is really smart, they'll use AI to do that automatically for you. And then ceremonies become rituals to get through. And then real decisions are moved outside the framework completely. I've seen this time and time again. Okay, so without enforcement, and one of the reasons this happens is without enforcement and alignment with the mechanisms to the guidance that I have, this continues to happen. It continues to fall back into the mechanisms they already have and the practices that they're already used to. So it means here that the frameworks kind of sit on the top of the same structures that were there before, which means there's a lot more complexity inside of the organization, where coherence is never going to come together because I haven't addressed the complexity in the organization. So just having a framework does not mean I have structural alignment across the organization. Local wins do exist and can exist in using some of these frameworks, but enterprise, we can still have an enterprise level failure across the board. Coherency depends on how decisions are made and constrained, not just on following the guidance and the process. And that's what we end up doing. We end up ending up in that direction. So the key here is to have a common taxonomy, a common structure that I can fit with all the organizations so that I can see common across all the organizations what's going on, and that I can create this governing layer that's more like an architecture. And the structural system that connects strategy, execution, and governance needs to be established. And the architecture of that becomes the coherent glue that glues all the business units together, whether horizontal or vertical, it doesn't really matter. Right? I need an architecture that I can point to, but I can't make it too complex, and it can't take too long. It has to be able to adapt to the different situations I'm seeing in each business unit. So in the next lecture, we're going to explore architecture, and specifically, we're going to talk about the standard, the Open Digital Transformation Architecture standard that we're starting to see organizations use to move forward and to create that cohesive glue across their business units so that they can have a successful digital transformation as well.
You've been listening to Digital Transformation Architect. If today's discussion helped you see your challenges more clearly, the next step is to apply architecture, not just technology. For deeper conversations with leaders and practitioners shaping real change, listen to Embracing Digital Transformation or check out our website at embracingdigital.org. Until next time, architect the future with intent.